Good morning, everyone. This is Jason Tebow. I am the Executive Director of the Streaming Video Alliance. And with me today, I have Dan Rayburn, or sort of, what we can call a streaming video guru or pundit or expert. He's been in this space for more years than I can count. And what I wanted to do today was just have a conversation with Dan about the ecosystem and really talk about some of the vendors in the space and what's going on, consolidation, acquisitions, HEVC, all these conversations that are floating around the industry right now. Dan has a really great bead on a lot of what's going on and will be able to provide some really interesting insight into the streaming video industry. So with that said, why don't we start off with introductions? Dan, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you've been doing all these years in the streaming video industry?
Sure. I mean, that's a long story, so I need to condense that. Thanks for having me today. So, a lot of people really don't know my background or my history. I came right out of high school, went into the military, and then started being a systems engineer for Apple computers. So I was running around the city fixing hardware back in 96, 95. And I got into streaming because in 1995, most people don't know, one of the first large live-scale music events on the web was something called the Macintosh New York Music Festival. First done in 95, and it was about 20 clubs in New York City, wired with ISDN back in the days. No video, it was audio only. I think we might have been doing See You See Me and pushing a JPEG every few seconds. 28.8 was mostly all you had. Maybe you had 56K. And that was just kind of the start of streaming. At the time, you had Real Networks, you had Microsoft, you had some others just starting on technology back then, VideoNet, Zing. And it was interesting. I found it fascinating technology, and then in 96, Apple did it again. So in 96, I left doing all the repair work, raised a little bit of money, and started a live webcasting company. And so I went back to all the contacts I had in the record labels, because obviously music was kind of the first vertical to use live webcasting, and we basically started webcasting bands all over the world, is mostly what we did. And that was about 97. And then from there, anyone who was around back in that time knows the story that the .com days just started, and really in 98. So it got really, really big. Company grew. I left and then started it all over again at a small ISP in New York City that went out, raised $600 million, went public, a company called Globix. So I'm just, I'm fortunate to have stayed in the industry during the downturn as well, and spend a lot of time trying to keep on top of as much as I can. I'm not a systems engineer, so there's plenty of people out there that are far more technical than I am. I have a lot more expertise. I'm not setting up things on the internet, but I encode video and I test products and services. So I try and stay hands-on with which is as much as possible. And it's amazing to see where the industry has gone from. 20 years ago, webcasting was truly an art. Products and services didn't exist. You couldn't take a hardware component off the shelf like you have now from all these great vendors and just fire it up and do a webcast. I mean, back in those days, you had to bond ISDN lines together because, each ISDN line was 128 kilobits per second. So if you needed to send out a, 100K stream, you had to bond ISDNs. You had to use like a telezephyr back in those days. Like it was truly an art. And there were so many people back then who really helped bring that art to fruition and make it into a mainstream technology product like it is today. But yeah, those were some amazing times. I've said multiple times that between 1997 and 2001, that 3 or 4 year period, there were more technology advancements in our industry in the shortest period of time than there'll ever be again, because you had Microsoft and you had Real competing with each other and pushing each other, and that competition was so fierce that it forced them to one-up each other. Well, I'll add more functionality in my product, and I'll make it easier to use, and I'll integrate it into more of the ecosystem. And it was amazing for the industry at the time. That's really what helped propel the industry forward.
No, that's very interesting. And speaking about that, right? So thinking about all of that experience you've had, both technical and non-technical, and sort of where we're at today, right? So 2017, everyone seems to be watching OTT. There's a whole ecosystem now of technology providers, kind of like you said, all these great vendors out there making all these great products. What would you say is the state of the online video ecosystem today? Is it crowded? Are there too many companies? Can you talk a little bit about consolidation and acquisition as well?
Well, the biggest problem you have in the ecosystem is fragmentation. So, here's the example I always give. Everybody wants to talk about bandwidth, last mile, CDNs, the pipe going to the home, broadband. The bottom line is, every time one of these live events seems to fail, it's not a capacity issue. Think of all the issues HBO Now or others have had with, Game of Thrones or something goes online. You can't even authenticate. You can't even get into the system. It doesn't even know that you're an authenticated user. So it's a database issue. It's an API issue. It's it's a geo issue in terms of not being able to tell where you're from. Look at all the issues DirecTV has had with their AT&T, or AT&T's had with DirecTV Now. It's not a capacity issue. They're using 3 CDNs on the back end that can easily handle the traffic because it's not a lot. So the issue we have in the market is because there's no standards. Yeah, we're finally getting to a standard on protocol with HTTP, and maybe we'll get to a standard in HEVC, but not necessarily. But when there's no standards, the entire ecosystem is just a lot more complicated and way more complex than it needs to be. So any little piece of that ecosystem breaks down, what happens? It affects the entire chain, especially when it's live. So the ecosystem is really what needs to be fixed. We need products and services that tie better into one another without it being such a difficult for content owners and broadcasters and publishers to piece all this together. And that's why we've seen so many acquisitions in the market. You see Amazon take out Elemental. You see Google take out Avanto. Level 3 took out Servcast. Limelight took out Delve. These companies all want to try and make it easier for customers so that they don't have to go to 4 or 5 different vendors. Bright Cove took out Zencoder. You have companies that realize the ecosystem is the key, but even when they take companies out, there's still such a large portion of the ecosystem they're not touching. Maybe they're not touching ingestion. Level 3 does because they own Vivix, huge advantage. Most don't have a fiber network like that. That's already pre-installed in concert venues and sporting events, and huge benefit. Others don't control the CDN aspect. The OVPs don't do CDN. So you still have to tie into a lot of third-party services, ad networks, ad exchanges, analytics, QoS, QoE products. It makes it very complicated. To your other question, are there too many vendors? Yeah, there are too many vendors in certain segments of the market. Some segments of the market are not big enough to support the amount of vendors we have. That's not a knock on the vendors. It's, remember in 2002 we had 50 CDNs, literally. Today you got
exactly.
six that generate the vast majority of traffic and revenue globally. So markets consolidate, products and services change. Things get easier to do, but at the same time, we still have just a huge amount of fragmentation in the ecosystem, and it's not going to get better.
Well, and that brings up an interesting question because, as you talk about fragmentation and lots of people having to piece things together, there are some solution providers out there that would call themselves, for lack of a better term, end-to-end. Can you give us your thoughts on that? Is that the way for someone to go, who's looking to build a streaming service, or is it better, to really piece together best-of-breed solutions?
It's not a right or wrong answer. So it's like when people say that, I always say, well, what's the best car to buy? I don't know. What are you trying to do with it? How many people do you have to put in it? Where are you driving? You have to figure out what the use case is and the needs. So you do have people who run around the industry saying, well, it's always best to do cloud or not cloud, or pros and cons. Well, cloud services and then the ecosystems or piecing together best of breed is all dependent on what's your business model, who you're trying to reach, what type of content do you have, what devices are you reaching them on, what's your business model? Is it purely ad supported? Is it subscription based? Are you doing live or on demand? Because obviously live adds a whole different level of complexity.
Sure.
Are you using video for marketing purposes, like we do at streammedia.com, or are you using it to actually generate revenue? Are you actually selling content? Is your traffic North America, or do you have eyeballs globally? So you really have to ask yourself a lot of questions. What I always say to people is it's about picking and choosing the best technology to meet your needs. And there's not a right or wrong answer that will be the same for every customer. You have to do your research. You have to understand what the pros and cons are of wanting to take some of this on yourself in-house versus cloud. So I'll talk to a lot of companies who think they should do this themselves. And then you walk in, you look at their setup, you see they're doing their encoding themselves, and you realize this is why their video looks so poor. You're not in the business of encoding. You have people doing it who don't have a skill set in that. That's not their core competency. Don't do it. Put it in the cloud. You'll get better quality at a cheaper price, and you free up people whose job it is not to do encoding. But then you have others who want to have that control. They want to have that ability and flexibility to turn around content as quickly as possible, or they have a huge volume they have to turn around, or they have security issues where they don't want to stick it somewhere else. If you have the resources internally to do it, and it makes sense for your business, then that's the smartest decision to make. So it's just a matter of asking yourself all those questions and then figuring that out, or speaking to somebody who can help figure that out for you. But I'll never say to somebody it's always best to build it or to buy it or put it in the cloud, because you really have to pre-qualify what they're trying to do first.
No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's really valuable advice, that people need to figure out what they're trying to accomplish before making a decision about how to utilize all of the vendors in the ecosystem, whether it be an end-to-end solution provider or best-of-breed services. So
otherwise you don't really know what you're doing. You don't know
right.
if you're getting the value out of what you're buying. The other thing is everyone claims to be end-to-end, but there's few companies that are truly in this industry an end-to-end provider. There's literally a handful. And by end-to-end, I mean ingestion, creation, ingestion, transcoding, storage, media management, protection, monetization, tracking, analytics, delivery, the true lifestyle of video, that whole ecosystem. There's really very few companies in the world who can do that end-to-end.
Yeah, no, I think you just covered the entire value chain in a single sentence. That was fantastic.
Yeah, that's the life cycle. I mean, that's everything you need to do if you're delivering video on the web in any way, shape, or form.
So let's talk a little bit about online video and broadcast television. So this is something that interests me quite a bit, is trying to figure out when this is going to happen, when online video is going to overtake broadcast television, and not only that, but really ensuring that we have the infrastructure, the services, the video quality to handle the masses when online video does become the primary choice for people to watch video content. Sort of, how do you think that's going to happen? What do we need to do to make that happen?
Nothing, because it won't happen. And people love when I say that, because they love to come on the blog and argue with me and say, never say never. But the bottom line is, you can't compare two different broadcast mediums as if they're apples to apples when they were built for two fundamentally different things. The internet is not set up to be large-scale broadcast distribution with the same reliability and quality of broadcast TV. And I know people argue and say, no, look at Netflix, quality looks great. It does. Netflix's video quality is amazing, but it's still not as reliable as broadcast TV. It's not live like broadcast TV. The quality on a 70-inch TV is not the same as broadcast TV. And you know what? That's fine. It's not supposed to be replicating broadcast, and that's the problem in our industry, and particularly in the media, who does all these crazy headlines like cable TV is dead and dying. People want to compare it instead of realizing that most technologies like this are a complement to one another. It's not a replacement. Even Netflix will tell you the vast majority of their users have cable TV in America. It's a different experience. So forget the technical components for a minute. We're talking about a different way of viewing content. When you turn on the TV, you know it works, you know what you're getting, you know what HD quality is, typically the 17 or 19 channels you want to watch. That's about the average. Same with Netflix. It's a different experience. Netflix is what? Long form. Netflix isn't live. It's a different type of content as well in many cases. So consumers want to have the most choice in the market. It's great for all of us. The more choice we have, the better. But it brings fragmentation. It brings confusion, and it brings the biggest problem we have in the industry is everybody's competing for the limited amount of eyeballs time that we have with our eyeballs. We can only all watch so much video in one day. So where do you get it? Well, that's what you have to determine. What I hate is when I see reports like I saw last week where someone did some sort of survey and said, well, people watch more hours of streaming video on AT&T's Direct Now service than any other service in the market. Who cares? They only have 250,000 users. not relevant. You're talking, 1/5 of 1% of the total pay TV market. So you have to put these numbers in perspective, which nobody ever does, because then what happens is the media sees that report and goes right headlines like what? Number of streaming video hours is displacing cable TV. No, it's not. Not when you're talking about such a small sample size. Now, has there been a huge shift? Yes. Have we seen cord cutting to a degree? We have. But they're very, very different mediums. On the infrastructure side, to answer your question, every single time we as consumers watch another piece of video and spend one more second watching it or consuming it, it costs that company more money. The economics on the internet are broken. The moment you put a TV show on TV, the moment a broadcaster puts a TV show on TV, or you put a song on a radio tower, whether one person watches it or a million person watches or listens to it, there's no additional cost. It's a fixed cost. And that's the inherent problem on the internet, is that it's broken from a monetary standpoint. Now, people will say, oh, well, look at all the great content, all the OTT content. Yeah, but none of these guys are making money yet. Netflix has a huge amount of debt. Hulu's not profitable. So these businesses still have a long way to go to where they're actually making money. So niche content certainly can make money. But we've got a long way to go with OTT, and I feel like we're really just getting started now. If you look at the live linear services that are out there, Sling TV, AT&T, Hulu, PlayStation View, you add up all their subscribers combined, they're going to have less than 3 million subs by the end of this year. It's not a huge number.
That's
not big. And then throw into that also, you have some side ones. HBO now, they have 2 million subs. CBS All Access, they want to be at 4 million subs by 2020. That's great if they get to 4 million by 2020, but it'll take them 7 years to go from 0 to 4 million. So again, people forget this stuff doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. And for anyone who's around back in the days, they'll remember the Quest commercial. I think it was from 1999, and it was on TV, where a guy walks into a hotel room in the middle of the desert, and the hotel manager says they don't have air conditioning, they don't have anything, but we have every movie ever made on demand. And they said, how's that possible? And he said, it was an ad for Quest. Remember Quest, Ride the Light. That was their whole mantra.
Yeah.
Okay, that was, what are we looking at now? 18 years ago? And we're just now starting to get to the idea of where, there's so much available on demand anytime, anywhere. But that's how long this stuff takes. So for all the people who set wrong expectations in the market of this technology will get adopted tomorrow, or 4K will be here within a year, it's bad for all of us because it sets proper expectations with VCs. They put money in, they don't get the return they want, companies go under, publishers think they're getting quality of certain service that they're not. Expectations is the biggest thing we have to manage in this market.
No, and I would completely agree with that. I mean, and sort of when I ask that question about this transition from linear broadcast to online video, I always, couch it in that it's a generational change. And so the millennials have started it, but it's actually the generation after them which is really going to push it forward. So yeah, that's 25, 30, 40 years away, from really seeing that kind of thing come to fruition. So I completely agree about expectations. I think that's really important.
And I think the technology is important, but we focus too much on that technology. Because keep in mind, we've been talking about multicast technology for 20 years. And you still have people who say, oh, one day it'll be adopted. It will not. All the network providers have already said it's too expensive to adopt, and there's no benefit to them because the cost of bandwidth and transit and optical now is so low. So if there's not an inherent business value behind the technology, it's not relevant. And that's something that's hard for me to explain to a lot of companies because they're so adamant about their technology and they're so into it, and I totally respect that. But they haven't learned, because most of them haven't been around 20 years, that the best technology is not what always gets adopted. It's what's easy to use. It's what's easy to implement. It's what ties into the ecosystem.
Exactly.
It's what's easy to understand and buy and sell. And a lot of companies just don't get that with the pitches I get. It's like, but my technology is better in company A. And I say, okay, how are you going to sell it? How are you going to package it? What's the value of proposition in the market? And they go, it's cheaper. I'm like, that's not going to work.
Well, let's talk about technology a little bit. There was a technology announcement that happened, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago at the Worldwide Developer Conference, and that was Apple's recent announcement to support HEVC in all of their devices. So what does that mean for the industry, and more importantly, what does it mean for the consumer?
What does it mean for the industry? We don't truly know. It's too early to know. Here's the thing. I mean, I wrote a blog post about it because I think it's important. I think it's a big step forward for the industry, but it's not a big step overnight. It's going to take time. Why did Apple select HEVC over VP9? Of course, we don't know. But the bottom line is because Apple has such penetration in the market from a platform standpoint and obviously from a hardware standpoint, when Apple does things like that, a lot of other publishers and content owners and broadcasters and other technology companies take note. So they then start, like when Apple stopped supporting Flash and iPhones and iPads, publishers started rebuilding their websites just to work on those devices. Like they changed how they did things, how consumers were able to consume content. So I think it's a big deal for the industry because of the reach that they have, because of it's Apple and the pressure that they have. At the same time, the Alliance for Open Media, their AV1 codec, it gets down to, for a lot of these folks, the patent issues. So you have 3 patent pools right now on HEVC. The whole idea with Alliance for Open Media is that AV1 will be royalty-free, but we don't know that for sure. It's way too early to say that. Proof of concepts, they hope to have something up at the end of the year, but it's still years away before it's going to be used. And even they are saying it's not to replace HEVC, it's the next generation after HEVC. So that's sort of the thing to keep in mind, where I hear people say, oh, well, it'll come out next year. And it's like, no, even they're saying, they're being very good with their expectations. They made it very clear. This is not something to replace HEVC. It's the next generation. So
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and they're very upfront about it, which is awesome because they're big companies that are represented in the Open Media Alliance or Alliance for Open Media. The thing I'm looking at with Apple is, they specifically came out during their announcement and said that they believe there's a 40% bitrate reduction that HEVC will deliver over H.264. That's interesting to see them use that number because Netflix and others have used different numbers over time. And what it shows is that there's still a debate in the industry about what type of compression savings are you really getting with HEVC. Part of it is how you do it, type of content you have, long form, short form, sports, not sports. But the bottom line is that these technologies are now becoming easier to use. We're getting higher quality video at lower bit rates. Netflix recently announced how they lowered their bit rate for their delivering content to mobile. I forget in what country or region, yet we're still getting better quality. Having Apple really support HEVC obviously will help on the hardware side as well. Some people are talking about HDR. I don't personally care about HDR. I think that's kind of a gimmick, even though companies seem to be very interested about it, like Netflix and others. So I just look at the HEVC announcement and say, I think it's important, but we're all playing a bit of a guessing game here. You have to watch and see what happens. But it's nice to feel like now that we have pretty much a dedicated protocol for streaming with HTTP, we're getting away from all RTSP, RTMP, RTMP, all the proprietary stuff that, maybe over time, even if we can default to, VP9 or HEVC or whatever it is, I feel like we're getting back into those days where it used to be real or Windows, and that's not good.
No.
Because now you have to think about, do I have to re-encode my entire library? And that's bad for the industry. It's good for vendors, short term, because they're going to get more work, but long term it's bad because it's a fragmented marketplace and it impacts the consumer. And the consumer has to make choices that it can't make because it doesn't understand the technology, nor should it have to. But you walk into a Costco to buy a TV, none of the 4K TVs are even connected to a 4K source. And then they have signs that say, well, this is a smart TV, except you can't demo the smart TV functionality because they're not connected to the internet. So you don't know what apps they actually get. So consumers then are still picking a TV at Costco based on price and screen size, not quality, not functionality. And that's a lot of the issues we have in the market. Consumers don't actually get to pick and choose services or products based on what the vendors want them to pick for.
No, that makes total sense. I mean, And that's kind of what I was trying to get at with that question, was understanding what consumers will really get from Apple's announcement. And you answered that, pretty succinctly, in that there's going to be benefit there. Consumers are going to benefit, but it's going to be way down the road. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to happen, even next year. There's still a lot to sort out, even as Apple picked HEVC over VP9. So thinking about, still on the technology side, there was something you had said earlier about the cloud in a previous answer to a question, and I kind of wanted to circle back around to that, because I think the cloud is really interesting from a technology and vendor perspective, right? When you start talking about, hey, I want to build a streaming service, and you start thinking about, okay, what technology should I use, and what vendor should I go find? And then you think about the cloud, and you think about, companies like Amazon, who seem to be building a workflow in the cloud, and Verizon Digital Media Services, who seems to be building a workflow in the clouds. What are the advantages or disadvantages of using the cloud, rather than standalone boxes for video distributors? I mean, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I mean, here's the problem. Cloud is a very generic term. It's like saying CDN. What's a content delivery network? Well, it's any network that delivers content. Well, okay, that could be anything. So cloud is the same term. I hate the term cloud, because you have companies that deliver content on the internet, but then they say, well, I'm a distribution network, but I'm not a cloud provider. Well, you are. It's an umbrella term. So, part of the issue we have in this industry is everybody uses terms like cloud, performance, speed, availability, with no definitions, all high level, very generic. They all say the same thing. This whole industry as a whole needs an entire overhaul in its marketing, in its messaging, in what it's trying to sell, who it's trying to sell to, and what the value proposition is as a whole, as an industry. We've been saying the same stuff far too long. Cloud is one of those terms that came around years ago. I kind of give SoftLayer the credit for really starting the whole true cloud business. They were really one of the first. But cloud, from a pros and cons standpoint, it comes down to what you're trying to accomplish, how quickly you need it done, what your budget is, and whether or not there's a benefit to your business outsourcing that or outsourcing part of it as opposed to keeping it in-house. Someone like Major League Baseball Advanced Media, BAMTech, those guys are so experienced and so skilled that they build their own hardware encoders. Why? Well, because they can and they need to. It's what they do. So, they're never going to say, oh, we'll just outsource all our encoding to someone else in the cloud. They'll do it better than anyone in the cloud. The expertise is there. There's many of other companies that the vast majority of them don't have the skill set BAMTech has. Or you're much smaller, or you're not producing as much video and content. So cloud makes sense for you because it's easier, it's more scalable, and it saves you a lot of money because you're not investing a huge amount of CapEx. At the same time, when we talk about the cloud, the one thing that a lot of people forget, except those vendors who are in this segment of the market, is the enterprise. Guys like Citibank, Ford, Pfizer, Vanguard, MasterCard, they create more content every day internally than an NBC creates an entire month. So the biggest takeaway for anybody who's looking at the cloud is, first and foremost, you are a media company. Every company today is a media company. I get infuriated when I sit with companies who are not in the media entertainment space and say, well, we're not a media company. Yes, you are. You're producing a huge amount of content. You have to think of yourself as a media company. Now, you may not be positioning that content for sale or for distribution to where you're making money from ad insertion or downloads, pay to own or subscription, but you're still a media company. You're utilizing that content to somehow propel your business forward and make money. And that's one of the places where the cloud is really beneficial for a lot of these guys, because their core business is not typically the technology aspect. Now, you do have some very advanced companies, Citibank, Vanguard. Vanguard's a great example. They built out a huge amount of webcasting studios over the years and worked with a lot of vendors to bring a lot of that technology in-house inside their firewall and their network because they wanted to control it. It makes a lot of sense. There's plenty of other enterprise companies who just outsource it all to the cloud because, our expertise is not in distributing and transcoding packaging video. It's just creating it. So pros and cons of cloud is like pros and cons of any other service. You have to look at control, access control. You have to look at price. You have to look at flexibility, scalability, turnaround time, volume. And then you also have some cloud services that work better than others. I mean, to me, CDNs are clouds. The vast majority of all companies use CDNs. Transcoding is not rocket science anymore. It's not that hard to do in-house, but you may not want to do it. You may not want to invest the CapEx in it. You may not want to, in December, if Apple comes out with their OLED iPhone, have to set up a whole new encoding parameter in your workflow just to be able to support videos encoded to a new screen size. Yep. And that's because of the fragmentation in the market. Everything keeps changing, and you have to change on the back end that workflow. So pros and cons of cloud are just, it's like any other product or service. Figure out what you need, what you're trying to accomplish from a business standpoint. Stay away from all the marketing terms. Stay away from all the high-level, best of breed, end-to-end, and really get hands-on with the products and services and see what it really does. Because everybody claims to do everything. And then you have some companies who say, no, we're focused, we do just one thing. I always use Elemental as the example. Elemental came to a very crowded market, transcoding. You had a lot of guys here. You had Inlet Technologies, got acquired by Cisco. Telestream, Harmonic, and Vivio. I mean, just so many transcoding companies that were out and still out there. And Elemental came kind of late to the game, but they said, we're going to do one thing, and we think we're going to do better than anybody else. And we're not going to get into it and then say, oh, now we're going to offer third-party services like, oh, well, now we'll start doing DRM. Now we'll get into, the ad network or selling ads or laser-focused. And those are the companies that tend to do very well in the space when they're smaller because they can put all their time and effort and money and R&D and everything else into a product that solves a specific problem for a specific vertical. So I love when vendors focus. I don't like when VCs come to the market or come to me and say, well, we've put money into a vendor and they're growing, but we want them to grow faster, so now we're going to tell them to get into the enterprise market. Well, that's a whole different market than media entertainment. You're solving a different problem. You can't just repackage your service overnight and call it an enterprise product, and that's a mistake a lot of companies make. So while there's this mentality in our market that you have to be everything to everybody, I love companies who aren't. I love companies who say, nope, don't do that. Sorry, go find somebody else. You know what you do and you do it well, and you're good at knowing what not to do. And to me, that's a skill set.
Oh, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And then, thinking about that though, kind of the way you've described, lots of people doing things in different ways, right? Some are doing it in-house, some are doing it externally, some are building it themselves, some are, so everyone is doing it according to the way they see best to do it. Who do you think is doing it best right now from a video provider standpoint, right? Is it Netflix?
That's a no-brainer. I mean, it's BAMTech. BAMTech's been doing this longer than anybody. So they have a huge advantage. They rolled out one of the first true OTT services with MLB.TV, which was also live, which, as we know, brings a huge set of complexity. So, to me, BAMTech is amazing just because they're like the special forces of our industry. What they do it so well. They have more resources and expertise than anybody. And look at who they're powering. ESPN, WWE, PlayStation View, Twitter, Bloomberg. NHL, WWE, I think I said that one, but the list, is huge, and it's major brands. And, what happened? Well, you saw NBC take note of that, and they've been doing live events for a long time, and they have a lot of skills, so what did they do? Well, they started NBC Playmaker. Same idea as BAMTech. Hey, we're already doing this for ourselves, why don't we start offering this to other companies? And then you saw Turner do what? They took out iStream Planet. So they could start offering it to others. And then you saw Comcast. Comcast had taken out the platform a long time ago, but then they bundled it in with the whole wholesale group, and they added some additional acquisitions on the ad side, and then they came out and said, well, we can do it end-to-end. And then Level 3, they took out Servcast. Level 3 owns the pipe, which is unique, like Comcast. Comcast last mile, Level 3 network provider, but then Level 3 also owns Vivek. And then they own 2 broadcast op centers. So now they're going to a customer and saying, I can truly control your content from creation to distribution. I own the network. It's a very compelling offering. At the same time, nobody can compete with a quality standpoint on the delivery side with Comcast because nobody else is the last mile. So it's interesting how the market has shifted to where we have what I consider true ecosystem players. And some of them do end-to-end. Like BAM does everything, but they're not going to do delivery. They'll still outsource to Akamai, Limelight, Level 3, all the CDNs, which makes sense. No point in them doing that. There's no value to the customer there. The CDNs already provide a great service at a great price. So you have vendors in the space that are doing a really good job providing more than just a very simple solution. But then you have plenty of vendors who are really good at just transcoding or just media management or just content protection. And to me, there is no knock on those guys because they're good at what they do. And you have far too many people who say it's too small, it's too focused. But I respect a company who's not trying to be $100 million. I'm $10 million today, I'd like to be $20 million, a year from now, or $25 million. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. To me, Avanto is a great example. Knew the Avanto guys a long time, loved their product, worked so well. NBC loved it, rolled it out nationwide. Avanto didn't feel like, okay, I now need $100 million so I can blow out my business. No. Let's just keep doing what we're doing, keep adding customers, keep getting word of mouth. NBC's good, you'll get others. It's a great product, we're improving on it. What happens? Google takes note and takes them out.
Yep.
Nice organic strategy, organic growth, wasn't trying to be acquired. Opportunity presented itself because you did good work. As opposed to some of the companies who get in the market that I talk to and say they're doing $20 million this year, and they're like, well, we're going to raise Series B or C because we want to be $100 million in 2 years. Why? Well, because your VCs are forcing you to. Don't go that route. There's nothing wrong with small and organic, but everybody wants such a huge return. And unfortunately, some of the acquisitions we've seen in the market, which have been idiotic from a valuation standpoint, have tainted the market completely. And I'll point to Brightcove. Brightcove taking out Zencoder for $40 million. That's 20 times. That's a 20 times valuation based on Zencoder's revenue at the time. It's absurd. And the problem is every other transcoding vendor in the market now goes around going, well, if they got taken out for 20 times, I must be worth 40 because I got more than $2 million in revenue. And yet what happened? When Amazon took out Elemental, TechCrunch started it without checking anything, saying Amazon paid $500 million for Elemental. No one checked the facts. Everyone picked up on it. Everyone ran with the story. So for 3 months in the market, Amazon got paid $500 million. Then what happens? Amazon files a regulatory document that says they paid $296 million. It's a big difference.
Wow. Yeah, that's a huge difference.
3 times projected revenue for Elemental. That's a fair price. That's what they should have gotten. Yet it tainted the market because nobody cares about actually doing the research to figure out if it's real. And as a result, VCs and everyone else get super excited thinking their company will get a larger valuation. So to me, there's still too much greed in the market. I still hear of offers that are legitimate that companies have gotten that they should have taken because, they're offered $400 million and they think, nope, we'll sit around 3 years, we'll grow our revenue 40% each year, and then we'll go public. And it's like, well, you're taking a big bet on that. And you know what? It's not your money. It's your VCs. And they obviously make the decision. There's a board and whatnot, but there's still too much greed in this market. It's always been an aspect of, I think, any industry, not just obviously streaming or technology, but it's one aspect I've never liked.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with you there. There is a lot of drive from the venture capital community on returns. I mean, that's what being a VC is all about, is getting returns. But let's put that aside for a second. And you had said something earlier in the conversation again around, you said what some people would consider to be a dirty word in streaming video and in general, and you said the word standards. And the reason I say that is because some people feel that standards limit innovation and limit what people can get accomplished. But I obviously come from a perspective much different than that. So I'm actually curious about what you think about standards in the online video space. Is the industry lacking a common voice? Could standards help solve some of this fragmentation?
I mean, so here's the thing. Look, anyone who's read my blog or anyone who knows me knows I'm a realist. I don't care about perception. I care about reality. I don't sugarcoat anything. And I know people sometimes want me to be more political in that regard, but I'm all about setting right expectations because I've been through that dot-com burst. I don't want to see it happen again. The market lost $5 trillion in those 2 years. It didn't help our industry. In 2000, everybody left. More than 1,000 vendors went out of business within a year. There was nothing good that came of it except teaching a lesson to a lot of these people who, again, were greedy. So today when people talk about standards and they want opinions on it, it's a waste of time to even talk about it because you're never going to get Apple and Google and Microsoft and Sony and Amazon to all get together and say, hey, let's create a standard for everybody. Let's all work together. It's not going to happen. It's a pipe dream. So it doesn't matter whether standards are going to help us or not. Standards are not going to come about because these companies don't work together. Why? Because they all want their technology used. They want their proprietary technology or their platforms or their ecosystem used because it's in the benefit of them. So I think the big thing that a lot of people in the industry forget, and pretty much everybody in mainstream media forgets, is these companies are not doing what's best for consumers. They're doing what's best for their bottom line, their businesses. So when people write all the time like, oh, well, a la carte will have to come because it's what consumers want, they're not doing what you and I want as consumers. They're doing what makes them the most money. And that's the issue with standards is, to me, it's just a moot point to even talk about it because we've been talking about standards in this industry for 20 years. Today, what standard do we have? Standard bitrate? No. Format? No. Codec? No. Aspect ratio? No. Player? Protocol? Maybe protocol. That's the one area where I think we've made a huge amount of improvements in, well, let's see, when did Flash Media Server come out? Well, we can go back to RTSP with Apple, with Real. So it's been 20 years. It took 20 years. So
that's a long time.
Do we have DRM standards? No. Do we have metadata standards? No. Do we have QoE standards? No. Are companies or organizations all trying to sometimes create some of those? Yes, but even if one is created, if people don't adopt it, it's not a standard. So
right, exactly. That's the issue.
To me, the standard question is just, it doesn't make sense to discuss it because it's just, we don't control that. The companies that control these industries control it, and they are not going to work with one another. They sue one another over everything, let alone they're going to sit down and work together on standards. It's not realistic.
No, you're probably right. I mean, and that's, from the Streaming Video Alliance perspective, I guess that's why we work more on best practices and specifications than standards, because of that problem exactly, right? Getting people to come to agreement on standard is difficult,
impossible.
If not impossible sometimes. Yeah.
Yes. So if you create best practices, hopefully they start to implement them. They see the value, and maybe a standard is created over time, or the best practice gets ratified and sent to a standards body. That was the whole point of why we did it that way, the SCA. Yep. But you still are reliant on the big companies that control the vast majority of this industry in many ways to adopt them. And if they don't, then it can be the best process or technology or standard out there, but it doesn't become one.
Right. We need collaboration. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. We need people to actually work together.
And how many vendors want to work together, the big guys? Very few. The other term I don't like, or the other issue I don't like about standards is there's never any definition of a standard. Standard what? Process? Because a way to do something, a standard of, hey, here's an idea and a methodology of how we should do something, it's very different than a technology standard. I'm an analyst. Frost & Sullivan, I spend all time looking at data. All things we care about are methodology. So when someone says to us, okay, why do your numbers say this or that? I said, well, here's the methodology behind it. Here's how we define these things. Because the definition and the way the data is collected determines the outcome. And your methodology there is important. So I look at the term standard differently because, processes are very different than technology. And I think the industry could come together in a process for many aspects of the workflow. But from a technology standpoint, no, it's not going to happen. I mean, look what we have now. HEVC, and we got, VP9, and now we're going to have, Alliance for Open Media. Yeah.
Yep.
Right back to the late 90s days. So Real and NetShow.
I like where this is going because it's a little bit of speculation and winging it, and that's kind of where I want to end this webinar is to talk a little bit about what the future holds. So break out your crystal ball We can talk adoption, we can talk technology, but so what do you think is going to happen in the next 5 years, and the next 10
5
years,
years,
the next
huh?
20 years? Yeah.
All right. So you won't like my answer. I never predict anything out past a couple of years. Because here's the thing I always say to people: if I'm predicting anything past a couple of years, is my guess any better or worse than yours? No. 3 years out is typically what I like to predict, even when it comes to data. 5 is sometimes we're forced to, but even 3 years I feel is realistic, because again, I think it's about being realistic.
Right.
What we're going to see down the line, whether it's 2 years from now or 5 years from now, is we're going to continue to see a market that's very fragmented, because we have more devices and we have more platforms coming out, and consumers are going to have to pick and choose where they're spending their money and where they're spending their time. And that's a good thing from a choice standpoint. It's a bad thing from a just pure not sure the differences between the services, or how they work, or which device they work on, or how well they work, or what the quality is, or you see how frustrated consumers get online from that. So the future holds fragmentation. The future holds no standards. That's just the nature of our industry. But what I always try and remind people is that's not the future. That's the industry we've been in for more than 20 years. We've had fragmentation, and we've still pushed forward. We've still come out with new services. We've still rolled out new consumer services. We've still made products and services easier. We've allowed customers to do more with less. We've lowered pricing in the market. I mean, just look at bandwidth pricing alone, what it's done in 15 years.
Yeah, amazing.
The other thing we're going to see a lot more of is consolidation. So the term everyone's using now is, the whole internet and the networks have flattened. If we think about 15 years ago, the amount of major carriers that existed in the U.S., most of them are gone. They've all been eaten up. Just look at the amount of companies Level 3 alone has acquired on the network side. So that changes how the services get deployed, how they get delivered, how they get distributed. So from an acquisition standpoint, we're always going through this cycle where there's constant acquisitions in the market. And after a whole bunch of companies typically churn out or don't make it or get sold for pennies on the dollar, there's a whole bunch of additional startups that say, I know a way to do this better, faster, cheaper. That's a cycle that never ends in our industry. And I'm sure it's like that in every industry. I think it's obviously more aggressive in tech. But to me, that's the most exciting part of the industry, because then you're meeting new companies who have a new thought, a new way of doing things. And it doesn't always work out, but it helps bring sort of a fresh idea and perspective to the industry. So what we're going to continue to see is a lot more startups trying to solve more complex problems. That's the other thing too. You don't see a ton of startups coming up anymore trying to solve storage. Storage is so cheap, and so efficient, and works so well, and is dominated by Amazon and others that there's just not a lot of innovation to still do there. I'm sure
Agreed.
Some storage people would disagree with me, but when I'm thinking of storage compared to transcoding or distribution or analytics, or big difference. So, to me, the future is the way that people, I think, should look at the industry is keep being excited about it, but be realistic. Set the right expectations with your employees, with your customers, especially with Wall Street, because so many of them are just not very educated on the market. And be prepared to pivot. There's far too many companies. Like when 4K started being talked about, I think 3 years ago, I wrote a blog post saying any company betting on 4K for the next couple of years is going to go under. Because you had companies that all of a sudden shifted their entire business to 4K, thinking they were going to get adoption overnight. Or we have the issue when all these vendors thought Apple was going to come out with an all-in-one TV. They started creating products and platforms for producers and distributors to create things for the new Apple TV. Well, it never came out. So companies have to be realistic, and that's what I'd like to see moving forward into the future, is just keep your expectations high. That's a good thing. Have a good work ethic. Be good to your customers. Listen to them. Make sure you have character and integrity in terms of the business you're operating, but be realistic in terms of what's going on in the market. Otherwise, in the long run, it hurts them, it hurts the customer, and it hurts the industry as a whole.
Absolutely, and I think that's to be honest, that's a great place to sort of end this webinar, is with those final insightful words, because I think you're exactly right. It's we're going to continue to see fragmentation and acquisition, and for companies to be nimble and flexible and be quick to pivot when they can and when they should is really going to keep a lot of technologies in play that would otherwise go under, being unable to switch directions or change when they need to. So I think that's a fantastic way to end this. I want to say, Dan, thank you for your time. Your insight has been absolutely invaluable, and I think our participants have really, benefited from your insight and from your thoughts on that. And so I just want to say thanks to everybody out there in webinar land as well for taking the time to listen to Dan talk about and pontificate about the streaming video industry. We're going to have a recorded version of this available online soon, so if you want to go back and listen to something, a question that was asked and an answer that was given, you'll be able to do that shortly. We'll make an email announcement about that when that's available shortly. Anyway, again, thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of your day.